This little girl said, "This is the best day of my life," when the police took her.
A woman in South Carolina is going to spend the next few decades behind bars after she pled guilty to repeatedly abusing her stepdaughter. She was just 8 years old. The allegations are some of the most horrific we have ever heard. Things like making her eat animal feces, force-feeding her laxatives, and having her stand in a trash can for hours while garbage was thrown on top of her. The abuser even tried to use makeup and temporary tattoos to cover up the ever-increasing bruises on the small child's body. And she's not the only one. We're taking a dive into her guilty plea and sentence and the status of her alleged co-conspirators' cases. We're on The Case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. 27-year-old Tenika Draper is the first of 4 defendants to end their legal saga in a horrific case out of South Carolina. She agreed to plead guilty to severely abusing her 8-year-old stepdaughter. Draper admitted to 20 counts of unlawful neglect of a child and 2 counts of obstruction of justice. According to court records, a judge ordered Draper to serve 35 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. By that time, she'll be in her 60s. But how did we get here? I want to take a closer look at what Draper was accused of doing alongside the victim's father, step-grandmother, and step-uncle. Law&Crime reached out to the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office in South Carolina to get more information about the allegations. The public information officer confirmed for us how the 4 co-defendants are related to each other. Tenika Draper is the stepmom of the victim. Ian Tatro is the girl's dad. Trina Ray Draper is Tenika's mom, so she's the girl's step-grandmother. And Ryan Desatelli is the victim's step-uncle. Deputies first went to a home in Welford, South Carolina on a street with a disturbing name, Wasp Nest Road, in September 2022. It was thanks to a call from the Department of Social Services. They needed assistance in a child abuse investigation. According to the Sheriff's Office, DSS got an anonymous report of possible abuse. In a statement to Law&Crime, the Public Information Office told us, quote, "Upon arrival, deputies were informed by the DSS caseworker that she had been out to the home several previous times to investigate, but the adults at the home had hidden the victim from her. There were 4 adults and 4 children in the home, including the 8-year-old who reportedly had a noticeable limp. The girl's legs were also reportedly covered in temporary tattoos to try to hide multiple bruises. Deputies had DSS immediately take all 4 children into emergency protective custody, and the 8-year-old was rushed to the hospital because of concerns about blood loss. She was there for 2 days, according to reporting from Fox Carolina. The girl was evaluated by a forensic doctor who determined that yes, the 8-year-old met the criteria for a medical diagnosis of child torture. All 4 family members were arrested. During a bond hearing, as Draper stood before the judge, the solicitor laid out some of what the victim told investigators about what had been happening to her.
And at this time, we'll hear from the solicitor.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is horrible. This is awful. And this is a case of medical torture of an 8-year-old child. This is the 8-year-old child's body. It's sickening. Specifically with this defendant, she also beat the child with game boards, wooden boards, cutting boards, cords, and frying pans. Made her eat cat poop and cat treats. Sat on her. This is an 8-year-old child. Placed her in the garbage can. Made her stand there. Forced her to eat hot sauce. Put her in a hypothermia bath. Made her kneel on the vent and crate on the floor, and that's why the scarring is so badly on her knees. Placed her forehead against the wall so her knees would have more pressure on the crates. At one point her head was not touching the wall, so she shoved her head into the wall. This little girl said, "This is the best day of my life," when the police took her. Not Disneyland, not Carowinds, not the mall, Walmart Supercenter. They put makeup on her to cover it up. Put temporary tattoos on her to cover up some of the bruises. I'd ask Your Honor to order absolutely no contact with this child or the other children. I'd ask Your Honor to consider GPS. There's no reason for her to stay here. They've been here since June from Vermont, any reason to leave, no reason to stay. She's looking at well over 100 years in prison, where she would receive consecutive sentences. Whatever else your Honor deems appropriate. I know that victim advocate Michelle Willingham wants to speak and introduce all the wonderful representatives here, as well as investigator Tiffany Hill, who, as is her custom, did an outstanding job in this case.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll be speaking on behalf of the investigators from the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office as well as the victim. But first, I do want to acknowledge that we do have representatives from the Children's Advocacy Center, the Guardian Ad Litem program, and the Department of Social Services. Your Honor, this defendant caused physical abuse to a small child that will take many months for her to recover from. However, the emotional and mental abuse is a different story. No child should ever be treated the way this child was. This individual decided to victimize a small child who cannot defend herself. As a result, they are a danger to the community. There's also concern that they are a flight risk and will flee if released. They are not from Spartanburg County and have no ties to this area. If bond is granted, we ask for the maximum bond be given with GPS home detention, no contact with the victim or any minor child, no contact with any potential witness, no contact with any co-defendant, and not be able to return to the incident location. Thank you, Your Honor.
But as I mentioned, Draper isn't the only person accused of abusing her stepdaughter. The girl's biological father, Ian Tatro, also allegedly hurt his own daughter.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is the biological father of this child. The doctor again diagnosed it with child torture. Here are the injuries, as disclosed by the forensic report. Discolored bruises and scars on both of her upper thighs, a bruise on the left side of her face near her eyebrow, scarring on her right knee. The small juvenile victim advised me the tattoos on her arm to cover up her bruises. 2 tattoos on her left arm, 1 tattoo on her right hand. Discolored bruises on the back on both sides. Discolored bruises and scarring on both of her buttocks, front lower half of her stomach, and on the front near her genital region. What appeared to be makeup foundation on her face in an attempt to conceal the bruises on her face. Lower left side of her face showed a bruise and swelling near her right eye. Specifically, to cause all of that, her father did as follows. Beat her with multiple types of boards, including game boards, wooden boards, cutting boards, cords, and frying pans. Would make her stay in the closet for long periods of time, making her sleep in there. It was small and dark. Would give her gummy laxative, and she thought it was candy, because that's what he told her. She would defecate on herself, and she would have to clean it up, and they made her wear pull-ups at 8 years old. She defecated in the closet and forced to clean up. They didn't let her use the bathroom. He said that he wished her mother had vacuumed her out before she was born and wished he could kill her and get away with it. I think I've said enough. You want to say anything, anybody?
Just that, Your Honor, the statement I provided earlier applies to this defendant as well.
We ask for the same condition.
Thank you.
The horrific allegations just went on and on. The girl's step-grandmother, Trina Ray, allegedly wouldn't allow the girl to use the bathroom. And when she ended up going on the floor, Trina Ray allegedly made her scrub the carpet. But the girl apparently wasn't scrubbing hard enough and told investigators that Trina Ray forced her head down and rubbed her face in the wet carpet. Meanwhile, Ryan Desitelli, the victim's step-uncle, is accused of not only hitting and kicking the victim, but also locking her in a closet. Tenika Draper was charged with 11 counts of unlawful neglect of a child and 3 counts of obstruction. As I mentioned earlier, she entered a guilty plea and was recently sentenced to decades in prison. Her co-defendants still face future court dates. The girl's father is charged with 13 counts of neglect and 2 counts of obstruction. Trina Ray is charged with 5 counts of cruelty to children, 3 counts of obstruction, and 1 count of assault and battery. The step-uncle is charged with 3 counts of cruelty to children, 3 counts of assault and battery, and 2 counts of obstruction. Joining us now to talk more about this case is family law attorney Randy Kessler. Thank you, as always, for talking about some really difficult stories with us here on Law and Crime. And in this one, very difficult to just think of what this child went through, and we're starting to see some of the legal finales, I guess, at least for one of the suspects in this case. just first for you having worked in family law and just as an attorney, I mean, what stood out to you about just everything this child went through?
I mean, Chris, it's like every time we talk, there's a new story. It's like expect the unexpected and expect the unexpected. This is just, if you could think of all the horrible things a parent could do to a child as a parent, under the guise of being a parent, this has all of them. And I'm sure there are more that will come up with another one next week, but it's just crazy. Making the child sit in a crate, making the child clean their own feces and getting their face put in it if they don't clean it well enough. Telling the child this is food when it's really a laxative or it's cat feces. Just unbelievable. I mean, this sentence is not, we don't give the death penalty for something like this, but somebody who treats a child like this should not be free to roam amongst us or, God forbid, to ever parent anybody else.
Yeah, and you think of an 8-year-old to experience this. I mean, that is a lifetime of trauma that they will deal with. And in the case of the woman who took a plea deal here, 35 years in prison, she'll be out in her mid-60s. I know you can't give somebody the death penalty, like we're saying, for something like this, but 35 years is a long time. To an extent, but then you think of I struggle with the 35 years is a long.
And 5 years, right? 5 years supervised afterwards, just to make sure she's not set free.
But then at the same time, it's like, what do you make of that? I mean, is that a fair sentence for this in terms of a plea deal?
We have to have rules that apply to the masses, right? We can't say that judges are so great that we're going to let them hear the situation and decide what's the appropriate punishment in this situation. There's too much subjectivity, right? Someone's got certain personal baggage and they think crimes against dogs are worse than crimes against children. So we have some rules, and these rules say to the judge, here are your parameters. There's a minimum and a maximum. And, is it appropriate? There's nothing that we can say that, the child deserved this or that this is going to be okay because there are worse crimes. Where does it fall on the spectrum? It's not murder. There's a chance this child will heal and will be a functioning member of society. It sort of feels like the right punishment to me, because if you say death penalty, well then what's reserved for the worst of the worst of the worst? Is there any possibility this person might redeem themselves and get rehabilitated? Maybe, but 35 years and 5 years supervised, it's pretty much a life sentence anyway. I think and especially because it came by plea, right? They didn't have to prove it. We didn't have to go to court. There's no appellate process. Taxpayers aren't spending thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars prosecuting and appealing and transporting. I'm okay with the sentence.
You look at the charges for the 4 people allegedly involved in this case, and the charges differ, where the girl's dad is facing 13 counts of neglect, 2 counts of obstruction. Trina Ray, who's the step-grandmother, she has 5 counts of cruelty to children, 3 counts of obstruction, 1 count of assault and battery. The step-uncle is charged with 3 counts of cruelty to children, 3 counts of assault and battery, 2 counts of obstruction. So it varies from suspect to suspect, and those are the 3 people who are still facing those charges and haven't accepted pleas or gone on trial yet. What goes into the decision about, in a case where you have one victim that we know of at this point receiving this terrible abuse, how do you figure out who's going to be charged with what?
Well, I mean, you know this, and I know this. It's a lot more complex than just who was the worst person, who should get the hardest sentence. It's what can we prove? What were the elements of the crime? Did somebody actively, premeditated, plan something? Did somebody cover it up? Did somebody facilitate it? Did somebody conspire with somebody else? Did somebody hire the hitman in other cases but didn't pull the trigger? And then which one's worse, the person who hired the hitman or the person who pulled the trigger? So you look at the laws on the books and you say, here are the crimes that we can prove. You charge what you can prove. And so they apparently looked at each of these defendants and said, for this one we can prove this, 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 and this. For this one we can prove X, Y, and Z, but not A and B. And you just charge as much as you can charge. And then if you plea it out, maybe you let them off the hook for the lowest one, or you let them plea something to save a few years in jail to save us, the state, the public, the cost and trouble of prosecuting. But they didn't all do the same thing. They didn't all have the same culpability. They're all in trouble. They all did bad. They're all going to pay a price.
Clearly there was evidence in this case to be able to put together such a horrific narrative of what happened to this child from every detail that the laxatives, the animal feces. But if you're law enforcement, you can't just say that. Like, you have to be able to prove it. It's the prosecutor's job also to prove that in court. As an attorney, and if you were trying this case from the prosecutor's side, what is some of the evidence that you would have been expecting from law enforcement to be able to corroborate these claims when going against a defense attorney who's going to try to keep these people out of jail?
The first thing I would do would be to see if there's any way to keep the child from testifying, right? And one way to do that is you get a plea deal like they have with this first defendant. And the best news is that the child doesn't have to testify against her, doesn't have to see her, because you have a right to confront your accuser, right? And, you're going to put the victim up there when the accuser can see and hear and may get out of jail one day. So shielding the victim is the first step. In this case, I think the victim is going to be so powerful that the victim's going to have to be a witness. I can't imagine anybody's going to want to go to court as a defendant. So if I'm the prosecution, I'm putting up my case, I'm making it loud and clear what we're going to prove and how mad the jury's going to be at them and how they're going to get the maximum sentence from the judge to try to encourage or coerce or manipulate or orchestrate a plea. I want them to accept the plea. So it gets, all my head is working as to how do we not have a trial. But if we have a trial, we're laying it all out. There's something else I worry about as a trial lawyer, and I teach trial law at law school, is overkill, right? It's hard to think that you could overkill, you could overplay your hand. But the more you say something, the more sensitized the jury gets to it. And when you start talking about feces, 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 sooner or later, all right, enough with the feces. So you got to save your powerful punches, and you don't want to start off by overwhelming the jury and showing the feces and the laxatives, you want to save some stuff and just say, look, we're going to show you some of the stuff. There's some feces, there's some laxatives, and then hit them, right when they're starting to say, okay, I'm getting bored with this case, wake them back up with, and yet it still just keeps going, So it's sort of like a movie or like a play. You've got to find the right time to hit the jury with what's powerful, and some of it may fluctuate, right, Chris? Sometimes it may be that you're going to go on to the next week. So do you want to hit them with some bad facts on a Friday so they're thinking about it over the weekend? Or do you think maybe they're tired and they're not paying attention, so you save it till Monday? You've got to be able to read the jury as the case unfolds. Fortunately for the prosecution, they've got a lot of arrows in their quiver. They can decide it's time to pull this one out. This one's making some headway. You see the jury react when something gets said, and you say, I'm going to hammer that in closing. So there are a lot of moving parts. You can't orchestrate it, and you can't say trial has to start A, B, C, D. You say, I've got all these 26 letters in my weaponry, and as it unfolds, I'm going to get them all in, but I'll decide when and how and where. And it depends on how the defense reacts, and if there are any legitimate objections and they keep something out, I skip over from C to D. So it's a long-winded answer, but the answer is trial is an evolution. That's why it's the most exciting thing a lawyer does and the scariest thing a lawyer does, because it's always changing as you try the case.
Yeah, and I think too, you teach defense attorneys as well, and people who are going to be defending some really bad people, and you have 3 people now who could go to trial and will need a defense attorney to be, to speak on their behalf. It appears that the prosecution has a lot of evidence. They now have someone who has pled guilty to these crimes, and that person may be a witness in a trial if that actually happens. When you teach defense attorneys about how to handle these types of cases, what is the approach that a good defense attorney would take for one of these suspects who are still facing charges?
So at one point in our class, we always say, repeat after me, Your Honor, I have no questions of this witness, right? Because sometimes you just feel like you're supposed to get up, but when you have a witness that's terrific, sometimes you just act as if it's no big deal and say, yeah, we don't need to get anything out of that witness because you have nothing. Sometimes when you cross-examine somebody, you give them a chance to rehash everything they said on direct examination. We also teach them, don't ask the question if you don't know the answer to it. There's the old story of Abe Lincoln who talked, he's cross-examining somebody, and the other lawyer made a mistake. The other lawyer said, you didn't see my client bite the nose off of the other side, did you? He said, no. And then, unfortunately, he said, well, how do you know he did? He goes, because I saw him spit it out. You don't ask the question if you don't know the answer to it. You can't win every point. You can't win every battle. You forfeit the battles you're going to lose, and you wait until it's your turn and you make your arguments. That's really hard for lawyers to zip it and not speak. But sometimes when the evidence is this bad, you just wait, and then you give it your one shot at the end, and you just say, yes, this was all terrible, but, and you better have a really good sentence to follow the but. And I don't know what it is, and I'm not in the room with them. They better have something really good to say, or they better plead. In
terms of the dynamic of this family, and we've talked about child abuse cases before, and it seems often that there are step parents who are involved. And this is probably a question that nobody knows the answer to, and if they did, it would be great. But why is it that there seems to be so much abuse of children at the hands of people who are their guardians, but not their biological parents?
All right, well, I want to preface my answer with I've seen many cases where the step parent is the better parent than the real parent.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
this is, so we see it all over the board. And sometimes I've had a judge give custody to the bad parent because they were married to a good parent who was the step parent. But we do see that. And look, as a society, sometimes we have a choice, and our departments of family and children's services have to figure out what's the best environment for a child. And is it better to put the child up for adoption with strangers or with someone who has a relationship with a parent? Or do we, condone or facilitate? And usually we want some stability, some consistency. So these people that have some history, an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, usually are first in line. Because that's just, all things being equal, you want a relative or somebody who's got a background, a family history with that family to be there. But that doesn't mean that we figured out everything about the people that are going to take care of the children. In fact, when you're a judge, you often feel relieved that there's somebody willing to take care of this child. And sometimes we're willing to say, you're willing, thank goodness you're going to stand up and take care of these children, and we don't do enough of a search. But if you want to make it really simple, when you and I leave the hospitals with our kids, nobody says to you, hey, here's a manual, let me check you out, let me make sure you can raise this child. You fathered a child, you're married, they let you and your wife leave the hospital. Does it get to the point in society where you have to do a background check on everybody? And I would tell you as a family lawyer, just because you're married doesn't mean that you're a better parent than someone who is a single parent or a one-night stand. You could be a great parent and have no significant other. So everybody's a potential threat to a child, but it's just an overwhelming task to try to protect children from any possible outcome. We got to hope for the best, and we got to alert people. And if you see something, say something. And innocent bystanders, there is no such thing. If you see something, say something, even if you're wrong. Children, they're the innocent ones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think of, another dynamic of this story that seems to come up in some of these cases as well is we know that there appears to be about 4 children that lived in this home. And yet the 8-year-old was the only one who received abuse to our understanding. And that seems to be a common theme, is that there's one child that is targeted, but then there's other children in the home that aren't impacted directly by the abuse. Is there any idea why that is the case in some of these situations?
No, it's almost like a Cinderella syndrome. Maybe there's already a diagnosis, something like that. But unfortunately, sometimes we see that with children that are disabled, right? The parents are angry at the child for being disabled or for having some deficiency, some health issues or some mental issues. It causes a bigger burden on the family. It's more money, it's more doctor's trips, it's more specialized food and diet and medicine, and people get resentful, not rightfully so, but maybe that's the subconscious. And I don't know anything about this 8-year-old, if there was anything, inherently different about this child, but that's just even worse, right? Especially if the child's aware that the other children are not being treated the same. Thank goodness, this is where it is, and this child said that was the happiest day of her life when she was freed. Miracles happen, and the miracle is that, at 8 years old, there's some mental recovery and some physical recovery, but life is long, and hopefully this child gets to a point of normal or pseudo-normal where they can put this in the past and have a decent life,
Yeah, and that's what everybody's hoping for. Legally moving forward, how does, for the attorneys for the 3 suspects who are left, the 3 defendants, you have someone who just took a plea deal. How does that impact the strategy of whether or not the other people should start talking and taking plea deals?
Well, usually the person who takes the first deal gets the best deal, right? Because prosecutors don't know if they're going to get everybody. And once you have somebody plead guilty, they're probably going to help you. They have nothing to hide anymore. They can testify because they've already been sentenced. So the next person in line, I think it's going to almost be a scramble to who is next, right? Who's going to turn state's evidence, or who's going to take the next plea deal, because the last person is probably going to get the worst. And you got some prosecutors that are probably itching to make this right and say, listen, we've got all this evidence. We want the world to know this kind of stuff happens. So if there's only one defendant left, they've got all this evidence that they're going to use. That last defendant is going to get the worst sentence and the worst deal. So I think that's the discussion, is how do we plea, or are they conspiring and talking and saying none of us are going to testify against the other, and do they trust each other? And even if they agree, we all know what happens, right? You see the jury come in and you start thinking about lifetime in prison. You say, I've got a deal where I can get out of jail in 15 years. I'm taking it. I'll take it first, you know. So I imagine that they're going to fall like dominoes sooner or later.
Yeah, and to think the best deal could be 35 years in prison. You know, that certainly might change the dynamic if someone, you know, wanted to try their hand at a trial. Randy Kessler, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. These stories are really difficult to talk about it, but we really appreciate you being able to walk us through the legal dynamics of everything that's playing out.
My pleasure. Good to be with you, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.